All right, let's talk about one of the biggest names in Chinese history, Liu Bei, or as many of you might know him, Lao Bi. For centuries, this guy has been held up as the perfect hero, right? But what if I told you the real story? The historical story is a whole lot messier, and honestly, way more fascinating. So that's the big question we're tackling today. Was Liu Bei really this shining example of virtue, this champion of the people? Or was that all just a really, really good PR campaign for a ruthless warlord? Let's dig in and find out who the real Liu Bei actually was. Okay, so first things first. Let's talk about the Liu Bei most of us know and love. The perfect hero. This is the guy who's been the star of the show in popular culture for over 600 years. And this legend paints him as the textbook definition of a benevolent ruler. We're talking about a leader who is all about being humane, righteous, and putting his people first. Power, money, his own life? Nope, the people always came first. This was the absolute gold standard for a leader, totally steeped in those classic Confucian ideals. Yeah, this pretty much sums it up, doesn't it? The popular image is a guy who's fair, sincere, and so incredibly loyal to his sworn brothers, Guan Yu and Zhang Fei. It's legendary. And his whole reason for being? This noble, selfless mission to put the Han Dynasty back on its feet. He's basically the ultimate good guy, embodying every single Confucian virtue you can think of. But, and this is a huge but, where do we get this amazing, larger-than-life image of him? Almost entirely from a novel. Yep, The Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Now, it was written centuries after he lived, and it's basically historical fiction. It takes real people, real events, and then cranks up the drama to 11, creating these really clear good guys and bad guys to make the story pop. All right, so let's put the novel aside for a second and talk about the actual historical guy. Because his real story, man, it's not so much about being perfect. It's about an insane level of resilience. You almost can't believe it.
And just look at this timeline. It really shows you what a brutal uphill battle his life was. He starts out dirt poor, selling straw mats just to survive, with only a very, very distant claim to being royalty. For decades, he was a wanderer, a warlord with no land to his name, just bouncing from one powerful figure to the next. He was almost 50 years old when he finally got Zhu Jilong on his team, and even then it was another 7 years before he had a stable home base. 60 years. 60 years of constant fighting just to become emperor. Think about that.
So what was his secret sauce? I mean, he wasn't always the greatest general in the battlefield, not compared to his rivals. Well, his real superpower, historically speaking, was his charisma. The guy was a magnet for talent. He just knew how to spot gifted people, treat them with respect, and make them fiercely loyal. From his sworn brothers to the genius strategist Zhuge Liang, the most talented people of the age wanted to be on his team. That was his real ace in the hole. Okay, so we've got the legend and we've got the scrappy survivor. But now we get to the really juicy stuff. We need to look at the parts of his story that don't quite fit that perfect hero mold. The moments that show a much more calculating and maybe even ruthless side to him. And check out this quote from historian Raffaele de Crespigny, because it is just spot on. He calls Liu Bei a condottiere. What's that? It's basically an Italian term for a mercenary leader. Wow, not a noble prince, but a captain for hire. He says Liu Bei was brave, for sure, but totally untrustworthy to his bosses and rivals. The only people he was loyal to, his own guys. That paints a totally different picture, right? A man loyal only to his own crew. And you know what? History backs that up. The guy changed allegiances whenever it helped him get ahead. I mean, taking Yi Province, that was a straight-up betrayal of his own relative, Liu Zhang, who had let him in as an ally. And that whole restore the Han thing, it was a genius political slogan for sure. It got people to rally to his side, which was, his own ambitious cause. This last point nails it. He looks like a kind Confucian, but he acted like a cold, calculating legalist who just wanted to win. This next story is the perfect example of his clever political mind games. So, the story goes, the super powerful warlord Cao Cao says to him, the only real heroes in this world are you and me. Now, that is a terrifying thing to hear, because it means Cao Cao sees you as a threat. At that exact moment, a huge clap of thunder booms outside. What does Liu Bei do? He fakes being scared out of his mind and drops his chopsticks. He plays it off like he's a coward just to make Cao Cao underestimate him. It's pure genius, pure political theater. So you can see we're dealing with two very, very different versions of the same man. Let's actually put them right next to each other and see just how big the gap is between the myth and the historical reality. Okay, look at this. In the novel, it's all about selflessly restoring the Han. But in the actual historical records, it's about personal ambition and just plain survival. The novel says his greatest skill was his massive heart. History says it was his toughness and his knack for recruiting awesome people. And get this, the novel often makes him look kind of passive in battle, like he's always leaning on Zhuge Liang. But the records, they tell us he was a pretty decent commander himself, even if he wasn't always perfect. The retreat from Dangyang is a classic example of this split. In the novel, it's this super emotional scene. He's crying his eyes out, refusing to leave thousands of refugees behind, even though Cao Cao's army is breathing down his neck. Now, the historical take is a bit more complex. Was it a really charismatic move that won him tons of loyalty? Absolutely. But it was also a brilliant strategic move. All those refugees? That's your new population base. That's manpower for your army. It was both compassionate and incredibly smart. So where does that leave us? How do we put these two versions of Liu Bei together? Is he the hero or the hypocrite? Or is it possible that the real answer is, well, somewhere in the middle? Let's try to pull it all together. You know, I want to go back to that historian Raffaele de Crispigny for a second because this quote just brings it all home. Even after pointing out all of the opportunistic stuff, he says, hey, look, behind all the romantic fluff of the novel, you can still see a guy who was just remarkable, a man who could inspire incredible loyalty and who just kept getting back up after being knocked down again and again. There was something special about him that we can't even fully grasp today. And that, right there, is why we're still talking about him hundreds of years later. I mean, come on, his story is the ultimate started-from-the-bottom narrative. A poor straw mat seller who becomes an emperor and founds one of the three kingdoms. That's huge. But he also became the symbol of what a good Confucian ruler should be. His life is just this incredible case study in grit, in charisma, and in leadership. So what's the final takeaway, benevolent hero or brilliant politician? Maybe the real answer is that in that chaotic, brutal era, you couldn't be one without the other. Maybe pure, simple goodness would have just gotten you killed. Perhaps the true genius of Liu Bei, the thing that makes him so fascinating, is that he had to be both. A man who was genuinely charismatic and cared for his followers, who also knew exactly when and how to be ruthless to get what he wanted. And maybe that's what makes him a true legend.